We have airmail from God for today's verse-by-verse reading from God's letter called Romans. Here is your host, Ted Gray.
Well, thank you, sir. And today we come to the section where Paul talks about politics, kind of. Romans 13, 1 through 4, and I read, "Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whosoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same." End quote. So Paul was talking about the existing Roman government, but it was before they persecuted Christians. Very important. Paul says that everybody has to be subject to God's civil government, and that resisting it is resisting God with consequences. So not only do we have to bless our enemies, but also our civil government. Paul was instructing in Romans 12 to do evil to no one, and now he is showing us that the government will do the avenging of the evildoers for us. The contrast was Romans 12, where he says, "Don't do evil to anybody, but do good to all men, even feed your enemies." Then he brings in the Roman government. That was their higher power, doing them actually some good. It was the Roman government that saved Paul from the Jewish mob, and today it was the U.S. government that persecuted the rampage of church burning, black church burning a few years ago. It is the present government that takes care of lots of people with welfare and food stamps and poor old people in nursing homes to the tune of $6,000 to $7,000 a month. Churches are not taking care of widows and orphans. No, the government is. So we need to give credit where credit is due, and it is our present government giving tax-free status to all legitimate ministries and tax deductions to all legitimate donations. Even as much corruption and self-service there may be in any political system, still, they are there because God allows them to be in power. God could just stop the hearts of Arafat or Hussein, Idi Amin, Hitler, Stalin, Castro, or Nero. Why doesn't he? Because God raised up Pharaoh to use him. The powers that be are ordained of God, all the way up to Lucifer. God allowed them to be there and allowed them to be evil. Just as every natural man is the enemy of God, but is allowed to live and to sin. God said, "Let the wicked be wicked still." But God is not the author of sin. He is not the author of evil or lies, but as it says, he is holy, and there is no darkness in him at all. He tells us Christians, be subject to your higher powers, the government. We have to be subject to our civil government, unless those governments contradict God, like Pharaoh and the midwives of Egypt, or Moses, or Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar, or the apostles preaching in spite of the prohibition by the Jewish chief priests. I personally have not run into any case where I needed to disobey the government. Whenever I disobeyed the government, it was a sin. Paul is saying that the Roman government is there by God's appointment, and Paul says, "Therefore I exhort first of all that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings, and for all who are in authority." Peter said to honor the king in 1 Peter 2, and honor means to prize, to fix value upon, to esteem, and it's the opposite of despising. And what means power in verse 1? Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, the civil government. And what means power? It means authority, right, liberty, license, commission, dominion, rule. It is the opposite of weakness. It doesn't mean morally correct power. The one who has a gun pointed at you has the power over you. So the ones who have the power over us, they are the higher powers. So the higher power which are over us by God's permission and ordination. And it doesn't even matter how they got it. It says, honor the king. How did Caesar, Pilate, and Herod get to be kings? They weren't all lily white. I believe we need to be good Christians first and good citizens next. Even in Soviet Russia, God made it fall without a shot fired. God showed his sovereignty in that he takes out some powers with little or no war. We are supposed to throw the bad kings out of the church, not out of the country. God's higher power in the church is a republic, representation by multiple elders. Single pastoring is wrong, it's lording over, and congregational government is wrong because it's mob rule. That brings us to the broader subject of governing now. Everybody has to be subject to God's civil government, and resisting it is resisting God with negative consequences on us. In context, Paul is talking about rulers who restrain evil and praise those who do good. That happens under most governments, even tyrannical governments. So human government is ordained by God. That means that sinful human beings have to be ruled by sinful human beings. That's not how it was supposed to be. God was present in the garden with sinless people. And sinless people don't need any law enforcer. They don't need any penalties. Because of sin, God left the first couple, and Adam became the first sinner to rule his wife. In Romans, we have read that God raised up Pharaoh, and here God kind of claims to have raised up the Roman government. Halfway decent government should leave good people alone. They should pursue evil people. They actually have to execute criminals. This teaches capital punishment in the New Testament. The law enforcer does not bear the sword in vain. So what is it there for? God said long time ago, long time before the law, that whosoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For in the image of God he made man. That's one of God's moral commandments, and it should be everlasting. Paul even said that this capital punishment belongs into the New Testament. He said in Acts 25:11, "For if I be an offender, or have committed anything worthy of death, I refuse not to die. But if there be none of these things whereof these accuse me, no man may deliver me unto them. I appeal to Caesar." So he says, some things are worthy of death, and he wouldn't refuse to accept that for himself, but he appealed to Caesar, and that's asking the Roman government to protect him from the mob. Paul said that some people are knowingly doing the things that render them worthy of death in Romans 1:32. But on the other extreme, Christians are never permitted to revolt or to start a militia group and live behind sandbags and machine guns or fight a guerrilla war against an existing government. Passive resistance is permitted when it comes to a choice of obeying God or men. If the government doesn't enforce the law and punish criminals, then they bear the sword in vain. It seems justice is for sale in many countries. We can see in Mexico now. Few criminals get convicted or even persecuted after about 15 years of appeals, even in this country. If this Bible is inspired, then it is what God says. The terror of a king is like the growling of a lion. He who provokes him forfeits his life. But in many ways, crime pays in this country. That's why they do steal cars, because it pays. That's why they do deal drugs, because it pays. Solomon said, "A wise king winnows the wicked and drives the threshing wheel over them." In other words, he kills them. We can also observe that if good people in a country don't overcome the bad people, then the bad people in the country will overcome the good people. Solomon said, "My son, fear the Lord and the king." God apparently does not believe in the rehabilitation of hardcore criminals. He believes in prehabilitation. In other words, before someone commits, let's say, rape, murder, or kidnapping, he gets to see some people in his town hung or beheaded with the injection. He will say in his heart, "Not me, I'm not going to wind up like that." But permissiveness breeds more crime, and fear is a deterrent to crime. You can read in Deuteronomy 13:11. God said, "So all Israel shall hear and fear, and not again do such wickedness as this among you." So fear of penalty is a deterrent to crime according to God. He said in Deuteronomy 13, "But that prophet or that dreamer of dreams shall be put to death, because he has spoken in order to turn you away from the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you from the house of bondage, to entice you from the way in which the Lord your God commanded you to walk. So you shall put away evil from your midst. He shall be put to death." And Deuteronomy 17:13. In Israel, the priesthood was also the government, and God says, "Now the man who acts presumptuously and will not heed the priest who stands to minister there before the Lord your God, or the judge, that man shall die. So you shall put away evil from Israel, and all the people shall hear and fear, and no longer act presumptuously." I don't like all this punishment. One more in Deuteronomy 19:19. "The judges shall make careful inquiry, and indeed if the witness is a false witness, who has testified falsely against his brother, then you shall do to him as he thought to have done to his brother. So ye shall put away evil from among you, and those who remain shall hear and fear, and thereafter they shall not again commit such evil among you." People teach that penalty or capital punishment is no deterrent to crime, but they're speaking against God. Have a nice judgment day, mister. This is all considered barbaric by this liberal present generation, but there's one thing worse than getting executed, and that is to meet God with more charges on my account. The number of sins committed by most individuals could be limited by good government, and that would make for a lighter judgment day for the sinner. That is the purpose of government, to restrain evil. So what are Christians to do? How do we enforce God's principles of swift and severe justice? 2 ways. Pray for kings and teach these principles, because eventually they will permeate society. The reason why most Christians are liberal and don't even believe in spanking their disobedient children is because that's what they have been fed. When we think that we are better than God, we're not resorting to draconian measures, then it's just that. We think we're better and smarter than God, but in the meanwhile everything is falling apart. Capital punishment is not the worst by far. Jesus said that it would be better if someone got drowned with a millstone around his neck than to live and offend one of these little ones which believe in him. It's just that nobody in the church is commissioned to do this. That is to be done by good government. In the church we are not given any penal code, so what civil government is supposed to do and what the church is supposed to do is light years apart. The church was never permitted to penalize heretics or other offenders. Christians are to love their enemies and their neighbor as themselves, and obey their government, their elders, their husbands, and submit one to another's needs. In the church we have a government for the people, by the people, and it's a leap from sinners ruling over sinners to saints ruling over saints. Christians are told to obey their multiple elders, and elders are told to lay down their lives for the sheep. As good civil government should restrain evil and encourage righteousness, so should good church government restrain evil and praise those who do good. But the restraining of evil has to be a war of words only. We cannot become strikers or practice any kind of violence against human beings. For an extreme case of restraining evil, we have only been given the excommunication of individuals from the church. This is message number 837, and you can hear it again at airmailfromgod.org. 837 at airmailfromgod.org. Until next time, God be with you till we meet again.